Joining us now is Brian Moran. He is the Secretary of the Commonwealth of Public Safety and Homeland Security. Secretary Moran, good to have you with us, sir.
Nice to be with you, John. Good morning.
One thing I really love about having you on my show is you're nonpartisan when you come on. You tell the truth about everything that's going on in your office, and you're a servant of the people. You're a public servant of the highest degree. I've earned a tremendous amount of respect for you, Mr. Secretary, since you've had this job, and I appreciate the efforts you've made.
Well, you're very kind to say that. Those are very kind words, and I hope to continue to live up to your description.
And I think whoever gets elected governor, whether it be the lieutenant governor or Ed Gillespie, I hope that they'll consider keeping you in this role.
Well, I know we are living in the Richmond area, the family is, and we're enjoying it very much. The kids are doing great. They're over in the Chesterfield County Public Schools, playing sports, thriving in the educational environment over in Chesterfield. So I have no idea what the future holds. We take day to day here in public safety. We have plenty going on, and so we don't have the luxury of looking into the horizon just yet.
Walk us through Charlottesville. We have had a lot of listeners very concerned, questioning the law enforcement decisions made, especially, Mr. Secretary, as it relates to the police and the state police standing down, if you will, or taking a cautious approach and not doing more to separate the crazy white supremacist crazy people that came in riot gear and with Antifa and some of the paid protesters there that came with bats and clubs. Both of these groups were looking for a fight. That's how they came.
Oh, no question.
And a lot of people don't understand why law enforcement was not more dramatic in separating the two entities. Can you walk us through what happened?
I'd be happy to, and let me just say from the get-go, and I'm aware of certain allegations with respect to something called a stand-down order. I can tell you unequivocally there was absolutely no stand-down order given by me, or certainly not the governor of our state police or our National Guard. That's just, let's put that aside as just political nonsense. So leading up to this event, John, and I appreciate very much the opportunity to describe the state's support of the city of Charlottesville, because it was unprecedented. The governor met twice the week before with his public safety team, which would be me, the superintendent of state police, the Major General of our National Guard, and our state emergency coordinator. And they described what they believed to be the pending events of August 12th, and the governor provided them the authority to call up whatever resources they needed. And so that was an unprecedented number of Virginia State troopers plus National Guard. And the National Guard, I'll tell you, there were conversations that week. We were like, wow, this is the first time we've ever called up the National Guard in preparation of a civil disturbance. And that was historic. I mean, the last time we've gone back now, 1932, a little student of history here with the bonus marches. World War I vets weren't getting their bonuses, and they marched, and the governor of Virginia called up the National Guard. Like, you got to go back generations the last time. And and it's been interesting because we called them up, and there was some concern, well, this is a civil disturbance, but nobody has said anything with respect to our National Guard, and I think people realized that they provided a necessary asset, and so we were pleased they were able to do that, and I commend their leadership and all of those guardsmen. This intelligence was being gathered by our Virginia State Police. We have a fusion center. That's exactly what they do. They gather and disseminate information. And we were getting intel that there was going to be a large gathering of alt-right, Unite the Right rally goers, and several of them had actually engaged in violence in other parts of the country. And So this information, it got to the level that I was concerned enough that we brought in the chief of staff July 27th. We brought him over to the fusion center so he would hear that information directly. And then on August 2nd, we actually had the governor call the mayor of Charlottesville to alert them to our concern about what was about to occur, and he made a number of recommendations to the mayor with respect to the permit. This is a permit that was provided in late May. Well, actually was requested in late May, and Charlottesville has a system that if they don't do anything, it just defaults to say, okay, the permit's granted. And so then the permit was for Emancipation Park, which if you're familiar with downtown Charlottesville, that's right there, right in the middle of Charlottesville, 1 block from the downtown mall where you have, new pedestrians, lots of shops, lots of glass. So that was a great concern. So governor called the mayor, you shouldn't have any weapons, very concerned. We should bus the rally goers from one location to another. That way we can keep them separated and under control, because we had experienced from the July 8th KKK rally that the rally itself was peaceful. Right. It was when the KKK members tried to get to their automobiles that the state police had to escort them. And then when they tried to leave, counter-protesters blocked the street, and we ended up having to call an unlawful assembly. We used 3 canisters of gas to get them dispersed. And so we were concerned, well, if you have hundreds of people in Emancipation Park, and once they leave, where do they go? And what, the confrontations the potential confrontation between rally goers and counter-protesters. So that was, again, one of our recommendations. That all occurred August 2nd. The afternoon of August 2nd, we had a Fusion Center member as well as other representatives of state police actually briefed the mayor and city council in Charlottesville. And throughout this, the superintendent state police was working in providing, assistance to the chief of police. And I think what everybody needs to understand is, local control, all what's been told to me over and over and over again, regardless of what type of emergency we have, whether it be a tornado or a snowstorm or hurricane preparedness, all emergencies are local. I mean, the tactical decisions are being made on the ground by law enforcement officers and officials and experienced law enforcement officials, and it's made by, the top law enforcement official in the city of Charlottesville. So the state provides a support role. So we were providing all this intel on leading up to the event of August 12th, and when we and then the governor, we met twice that week, as I say, and he mobilized the National Guard, and we sent the National Guard down to Charlottesville, and on August 12th, we ultimately, had to deploy them to protect and secure the park. So those were the events leading up to it, John, and I'm happy to provide any other. I was out there the whole weekend, so I went out after work. I drove out there after work on Friday, so I wanted to be on the scene, be able to give the governor, real time information, and I'm certainly glad I did go out there, and I saw things I hope I'd never seen. But it was a tragic weekend of state police. Two troopers. I mean, just Lieutenant Cullen and Trooper Bates. I mean, just devastating their loss, and then of course the young woman who was run down. So tragic weekend, but those are the events leading up to it, and happy to try to describe anything else for you, John.
So, Secretary Brian Moran of Public Safety of the Commonwealth with us. So, as I understand it, the decisions, the command was being made by the local Charlottesville police and its police chief, Al Thomas, right? I mean, He was in command of the situation.
That's correct.
So the state police were there as a backup to him.
Well, it's support. I mean,
support.
We were there in support. We had tactical team members and riot gear ready to be deployed. They ultimately were deployed shortly after 11. I was on the phone with the governor. The violence was escalating. Conversations with. I was in the command center. I was with Colonel Flary, and we got to move. And that's when the unlawful assembly was declared, we gave them 11 minutes to clear. A lot of them did. A lot of them did clear. We gave them 11 minutes. You got to give them some time to disperse. And then we moved in the tactical team through the park, cleared the park, and then the National Guard followed them immediately and secured the park so that our tactical team could respond to any calls that were required.
So I have a text here from Glenn in Chesapeake who says, what about the stand-down order from the mayor of Charlottesville?
I can't speak. I've been reading materials coming out of the city of Charlottesville. They're going to do their after-action review. I spoke to Tim Hafey on the phone yesterday. He's been asked to do the after-action review. I can tell you unequivocally there was no stand-down order given to the Virginia State Police or the National Guard. I've read that Charlottesville didn't do that either, so that's something.
I don't know what the mayor did, but
after action review.
But the mayor had no authority anyway, because the way the Charlottesville government is set up, they have a strong form city manager government. So basically, the police chief reports to the city manager, who serves at the pleasure of city council and mayor. So, I mean, even if the mayor did that, he didn't have the authority. They're going to do what they think is the best thing to do. Look, we're going to.
I mean, they got and we've all been reading the leaked memo. I mean, it's a shame what's happening in Charlottesville right now. But it's the city police chief ultimately who he was in the command center. He was calling the shots that's the way the law dictates, and that's how these things are that's how you proceed in these emergencies. So. I don't know what the role the mayor had.
Did you ever?
He wasn't in the command center.
He was not in the command center. So what he issued on TV or in a public statement really is moot for this. This is what I'm trying to get people to understand. Politics gets in the middle of this stuff all the time, but he had no authority to issue commands. That was in the jurisdiction of Al Thomas, who was the Charlottesville police chief. So here's my question. A lot of people say, well, why didn't the governor and Secretary Moran simply order the National Guard to go in between these two groups and separate them? Didn't they anticipate violence would happen once these groups were put in proximity to each other?
Yeah. Well, because we were in a support role and we were providing the support according to the plan that was developed by the city. So we have to do our own after-action review, and the governor has instructed me to do just that. We're going to do an independent review. We're not going to use Virginians. We're going to go outside and do an after-action review. But that was the plan. According to our work, we went according to plan, and we cleared the park. We brought out our tactical team, and they cleared the park quite efficiently. And then the National Guard followed in behind them and protected the park. So, we're all going to have to learn from this, and we certainly intend to do that.
So, Mr. Secretary, it sounds like to me, as a layman, as I'm not in law enforcement, obviously, but it sounds like from what you're describing that the Charlottesville police chief made a series of decisions to minimize the engagement, protesters and police, in order to calm the situation. So you can be an armchair quarterback and you can say that was a bad decision. It turned out maybe it wasn't the right decision. But the decision that he made was to not get his officers directly involved in separating these two groups. Is that a fair judgment I'm making?
We're just going to do an for one thing, you don't want me or the governor making tactical decisions.
Right.
Right. When they say, well, why didn't Moran or the governor order such and such? Hey, you don't want us making tactical. If we made tactical decisions, you'd hear a scream from everyone saying, what were these politicians, doing, making tactical? We rely on the law enforcement professionals. They asked for resources. The governor ordered unprecedented number of resources into Charlottesville. And now we're going to do an after-action review whether those state resources were used appropriately. Because I'll tell you, the governor and I have had, some tough conversations. Do we send state police into harm's way when we don't have control?
Right.
ultimately. And those are hard discussions because, we have 134 jurisdictions in Virginia. They're all very, they're very proud, they take great pride, whether it's, Abington or Arlington, they run their towns, they run their cities, they run their counties. To suggest the state's going to come in and start dictating authority and control, those are tough conversations we would have. But, we sent unprecedented number of state resources into the city of Charlottesville. Everything that was asked, we provided. So, we had the 2 helicopters in the air providing the video.
Let's just put this to bed. There was no stand-down order from Director of Homeland Security Brian Moran.
No, and nor the
Governor Terry McAuliffe.
Absolutely not.
So
there's a maelstrom of political agendas, and you get it.
I get it.
An event of this national magnitude, and everybody wants to promote their own political agendas. But no, I don't even know what we went. I mean, we put law enforcement officers in riot gear. I went to their training 2 weeks before. I mean, we were training this thing up 2 weeks before, Thursday and Friday. They were trying on their equipment. They were forming, in formation. You don't put people in harm's way lackadaisical. These guys were prepared. They're ready. They were briefed. We looked at Emancipation Park. We knew get-go it was a bad idea to have it at Emancipation Park. The city tried to move it. The ACLU sues on the very last. Look at the timing. The city tried to change the permit on Monday. We don't get sued until what? The court decision wasn't until Friday night at 9:30. Why is that, John?
Mm-hmm.
Why do they wait till the last minute? I mean, there's a lot of agendas involved. They're waiting for this last minute. Why not? Once that decision was made, because there was talk about that leading up to it. Why didn't they just sue on Monday afternoon or Tuesday? They go in, that decision's made, and then there's a lot of folks Monday morning quarterback, and I just want to take a look at state resources, authority and control. That's what the governor has asked me to do. We're going to do an after-action review and learn from it, because we it's unlikely we're totally out of the, there's going to be the potential for future demonstrations that could turn violent, and we need to make sure that we keep the public and our law enforcement officers safe.
So that everyone understands this Charlottesville police so-called stand-down order, or the order given to back off, if you will. The Charlottesville police were in the control of Police Chief Al Thomas. So any order that had to do with what went down was law enforcement's decision. Like you said, there's going to be a review after this. Maybe some of the decisions were wrong. Maybe your resources could have been used in a different way. But this was not the governor's doing. This was not your doing. Just so that everybody understands, this was Al Thomas's doing. Al Thomas made these decisions. He's the police chief. And he was the police chief of Lexington, and he was a captain in Lynchburg, and he's been on the force for almost 3 decades. So, he made a series of decisions, and he'll be accountable for that. But this larger political agenda, I mean, I didn't see it from the beginning. I'm glad I've had you on because, you can review. Look, to go forward and have success, you have to understand the past. So, we're going to have the review, see what comes out of it. But there was no governor involved in having people stand out in order to increase the propensity for violence, as far as I can say. I just think that's ridiculous. Now, I'm going to open it up to phone calls. We've been talking about this, Mr. Secretary, for 2 weeks. I got a lot of listeners that really doubt what's come out of the media on it. So what else have I missed here, Mr. Secretary?
No, I mean, what happened since then, we received, actually we didn't even receive a request. We heard on a last Sunday, that there was going to be a march from Charlottesville to D.C. And so we immediately, spun up, and I got a phone call with all the folks with respect to, Chief of Staff and others to say, what do we do? They haven't even asked for, when we got transportation on, because they wanted to march from Route 29 up to D.C. And I mean, that's just enormous public safety risks, in addition to just clogging the roads and being generally inconveniencing our commerce and our traveling public. And so we we got spun up, and we just took it. We engaged I sent a letter Sunday night saying, this poses significant public safety risks. You may not intend to pose any risk, but you could be the target of a car terrorist. I mean, we just saw that on August 12th, and so those concerns were expressed to them. They had a meeting Monday morning. We had two people there. And we talked to them, and we made provisions on the permit, and they are conducting that march very safely. It's Wednesday. They're going to get great weather today. Yesterday wasn't so good. But to date, we are being updated continuously by the Virginia State Police as to the march. We want to thank our VDOT friends. So far, so good. That march is being conducted in a safe manner and without too much convenience on the roads. And so that's how it should be done. Work with, I think that serves as a good example. Let's work with the marchers. They were very amenable to our requests. We said no guns, and so they were amenable to that. So we worked on the permit with them, and so far so good. As I say, it's going to come up. The march will end up in Northern Virginia in some more populous areas, but the state police has a number of resources dedicated to it. But I think that serves as a nice example of the communication and coordination with those demonstrators, and that'll help us inform us in the future. But there's some groups, John, that are just, they came for violence, and
right.
What happened on August 12th, I saw it. I was there from 7:30 to about 10:30 in the park, watching them arrive, and then I got a call that said, "Hey, things look bad on TV," and I said, "Well, I'm standing at the corner. A lot of people, a lot of yelling, but I haven't seen any physical confrontations." And so I ran up to the 6th floor command center, and from there could see. But the batons, shields,
riot gear.
Yeah, riot gear. It's
masks,
just
clubs.
And I was there Friday night too with the torch rally, that didn't last very long in terms of the confrontation. But that was very concerning. I spoke to President Sullivan that night about that, and so we're going to learn from all of this. And you got to protect constitutional rights. People feel very strongly, as they should, about First Amendment, Second Amendment. But it has to be done in a safe way. I'm Secretary of Public Safety. I make recommendations for the governor. Governor feels very strongly about public safety, huge supporter of our law enforcement and public safety. So we've got to find a balance that people exercise their constitutional rights, but do it in a way that doesn't subject others to danger or themselves to danger.
Absolutely right. We're chatting with Secretary of Public Safety and Homeland Security, Brian Moran of the Commonwealth of Virginia. We're opening up this to phone calls. We have a couple people on. Let's go to Sean in Newport News. Sean, you're on with Secretary Moran.
Hello, Mr. Secretary.
Yes,
my
Sean.
question, I'm not a lawyer. I don't know policy. Hello. When the state of emergency was declared,
Yes,
are
sir.
all groups at that point forced to disperse?
Yes, we declared that, and the unlawful assembly was declared, and we had a Bearcat come in from the state police with a bullhorn saying this is an unlawful assembly, you are ordered to disperse. And that was right at the corner of Market, where you've seen the video in the television. That's where the media was, and that's where you continue to see this loop of the violence. And so that's where that was, yelling, and the bullhorn disperse. The folks from Market Street dispersed, as well as the park itself. And so everybody was ordered to disperse. Anybody on Market Street at that point in the park were ordered to disperse.
Okay, so there's a lot of videos floating around the internet, the news. It appears at some point, and you're talking about different areas I'm not fully familiar with, was one group forced to dispense but not the other, or was everyone?
Yeah, everyone. I mean, the corner, the block of Market, the intersection there, I think it's First and Market, that's where you see a lot of the violence occurring on the television. that whole area everyone was ordered to disperse. Yes.
Was it too big of a crowd to disperse everybody? Was that what the issue was? Because it looked like there were still a lot of people hanging around.
They did hang around.
Causing a ruckus after.
Just people refused. I mean, that's what happened on July 8th. We ordered disperse, and they refused to leave, and ultimately we had to do the 3 canisters, and the state police have been criticized for doing that. And we made a couple of arrests at that point. That's what we were going to do. The challenge with doing the canisters at this location, it was problematic, I'm told, from a tactical standpoint, because it was so populated and so many people were downtown. We were right next to the mall. But the tactical team cleared the park pretty efficiently. Some people tried to push back. They just kept getting pushed, forward. And many of them orderly, left in an orderly fashion. Others stuck around, but ultimately they got dispersed. But then, Sean, the worry was, and why we didn't want it in Emancipation Park is, okay, we pushed them out of Market Street and the park. Where do they go? You got,
right.
You probably have 1,000 folks who showed up for the alt-right. You had at least that number, if not more, of counter-protesters. Where are they going to go throughout the city? And that's what we were dealing with, all afternoon. We trying to respond to calls throughout the city, and that's why we wanted it at McIntyre Park. You wouldn't have gotten into that kind of urban warfare that went on through the course of the afternoon. We had folks dispersed, the TAC teams, of course, city of Charlottesville, but we had, and that's why the 2 helicopters were so important, because we had to get eyes on on all of those city blocks.
All right.
Thank you very much for answering my question. You cleared a lot up, Mr. Secretary.
Thanks, Sean.
Thank you, Sean.
You very much. And I really appreciate what you're doing, Mr. Secretary. This isn't easy to do. Put yourself out there, but you've done an excellent job.
Well, okay, I've been quoted a number of times in the paper. I've tried to be accessible as possible. I'm very proud of the Virginia State Police, very proud of the National Guard. And if you have a void in information, I think people run with lots of different conclusions, and those conclusions can be wrong. And so I just want to be accessible to you, because we got nothing to hide, and we want to learn from this and for the next march and demonstration. So,
okay, let's get to Justin in Portsmouth. Justin, you're on the air with Secretary Moran.
Good morning, Mr. Secretary.
Good morning.
Just a word out there. I am a firefighter and a captain with the Portsmouth Fire Department, and we go out. And sometimes you have to make decisions, whether they're popular or not, but you're in a position where you have to make a decision. And Charlottesville's police chief just has my total support as far as him and his command staff. They've got to make a decision, and sometimes it's got to be in a split second. And, I know this whole after-action review and the media saying this and saying that, I think it's a bunch of malarkey. And like you said a few minutes ago, you and the governor, y'all have to go make decisions based off of the information you're given. So, both of y'all have my total support. Charlottesville Police Department, their police chief, they've got my support. Guy that works in public safety, I've seen stuff like this happen here locally in Portsmouth. I've been out, street fights, and our police officers have to break stuff up and secure the scene before we can go in to assess injuries and treat victims and patients and so forth. So, either way, good or bad, they had to make a decision. And, you've got to make that decision, because the road of life is paved with squirrels that couldn't make a decision.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think they did a great job. It is what it is, overwhelming. It just shows the bigger need of more police officers and law enforcement that are needed in this country.
Here. Thank you. Thank you for your service, and the greatest respect for men and women in uniform. And I continue to after the events. I mean, there is a lot of Monday morning quarterbacking going on. We recognize that. I do think the public deserves an independent review, which we will do. I'm pretty confident it's going to show things. There's a case to be made, John, and Justin, that if you look at this thing from the crowds that arrived and the individuals that came armed on both sides to cause havoc, mayhem, fighting, and up to the point of about 1:43 p.m. when Heather Heyer was run down, and 19 other injuries from that. It was a horrible incident. But up to that point, to my knowledge at least, that what has been communicated to me, there were no serious injuries from the park. Not one broken pane of glass. I mean, we were concerned there'd be tremendous property damage. I mean, we were right downtown. You and your listeners have been to downtown Charlottesville. It's a beautiful place. We were right there. I mean, Market Street is right there at the mall. Not one broken pane of glass. And you've seen how these people came. I mean, there was military units. I mean, there were the poles, flag poles, and
riot gear,
combat gear, so, hoods, and no
clubs.
Serious injuries. Now, I know that's not popular to say, and everybody's Monday morning quarterbacking, but there is a case to be, and I've heard Chief Thomas make that case that, considering what we were up against, as it turned out, and a lot of, we get intel, John, I get intel 24 hours, 7 days a week in terms of threats facing the Commonwealth. Some serious and true, others are bogus, but we got to, the state police, God bless them, they got to review all of them. And this time, our intel was spot on. The alt-right was coming, and Antifa was going to combat them in downtown Charlottesville. And we made unprecedented preparations. We put, the governor ordered the kitchen sink at this thing with respect to state support. And, a horrible incident at 1:43 p.m. with Heather Heyer and that fella who drove right into a crowd. But before that, you could make a case that this thing was handled in a way that saved. There were no lives lost up to that point,
and no serious injuries.
No, none to my. We're checking with the hospitals. We've gathered. There were injuries, but in terms of serious injuries, not to my knowledge.
Right. So look,
we're from a public safety point of view. We're always a little concerned.
Right. But you're right there. And the thing is, Al Thomas I said this yesterday, Chief Thomas is a very serious law enforcement professional. I mean, when the review comes back, it might have shown that he could have done things differently. But again, Monday morning quarterbacking is easy to do. And like you point out, at 1:43, it seemed like the decisions he had made to calm the situation and not get his officers directly involved in the confrontation. It seemed like that may have been working. Now, it didn't turn out that way, obviously. Matt from Richmond, you're on the air with Secretary Moran.
Yeah, good morning, gentlemen. I just had two questions for the Secretary. I was wondering if he could define what the alt-right is and who they are. And I also noticed, I don't believe he ever used the term alt-left. Is there an alt-left, and who are they?
Yeah, I mean, these are all labels that people are bandying about in the media. What I can tell you is our Fusion Center has identified, the rally itself was Unite the Right. So these were groups from the right, white nationalists, white supremacists, Nazis. I mean, you could see the flags, and we've identified those various flags that represent groups, which, interestingly enough, we had intel that some of these groups don't get along with each other. I'm told by some police that they could see fighting inside the park at some point. There was they don't necessarily get along with each other. There were a number of flags and units coming in as I watched them come in. It's Unite the Right. We're dealing with white supremacists. I don't know if they're actually KKK. There wasn't anybody with hoods. These folks, they went out. Their faces are clear on. You could see who they were. There were no hoods. And then the Antifa, anti-fascists. I mean, they identify themselves that way. That's certainly our fusion centers identified them. They just, were very violent out in Berkeley. And so we identified them being present on Saturday the 12th as well. And so we're just dealing with, I just deal with the fusion centers analysis of these groups and how they self-identify. Media, alt-right, alt-left, I don't get into those designations. I just deal with what the fusion center gives me. And what that means, because if you have the Nazis coming to Charlottesville or Richmond and you have Antifa, you can expect violence, and that's what we anticipated on August 12th. We had two groups that were going to engage in violence.
Look, there's no question about it, and a lot of people are caught up in, I guess, alt-right, alt-left, the names and things of that nature. I've really not focused on that. I've focused on, was there a conspiracy that the governor and the director of Homeland Security and the police chief got together and conspired to have the police stand down?
No.
That's my focus.
I will tell you just kind of a bigger picture here. And, I was standing in that park for, a couple of hours watching these young white men come into the park screaming stuff like, it's just horrible. And I got to tell you, I've just shaken my head. I just... I could not, I just did not understand what possibly could have happened in their lives, their young lives, that would require them to embrace Nazism. I mean, my father fought in World War II. Our generation, our parents fought in World War II against Nazism. Yeah. And then the white supremacists, I know Virginia has a tortured history about that.
They're nuts.
I thought we had evolved, and I just couldn't.
Mr. Secretary, we have evolved. These people
digest that. Just all these young white men yelling this stuff that just, I saw it Friday night with the torch rally. I used to see that. We'd still see it on, documentaries from Nazi Germany of the 1930s. To see that live on the University of Virginia campus with Thomas Jefferson, it's just surreal. And what drove these young people to do this?
Mr. Secretary,
I'm having a hard time figuring out.
Any free society is always going to have segments of people that are downright damn nuts. And these people are nuts. They represent the tiny fringes of society, those people that came out and got the license for the rally. Now, those on the alt-left or whatever you want to call them, Antifa, the radical crackpots.
Antifa. Our fusion center calls them that, so I'm free to
call them whatever they want. But they both of these
show up, and they're all they're all masked, wearing black, and they go after them. So both groups. What is driving these groups to do that?
They're nuts.
But we fought Nazism. We fought white supremacists. We should be evolving.
We fought communists also, and they're out there. People are there's segments of any free society that are off the wall. All right, let's get to.
I will tell you, John.
Paul.
The good news is, these arrests, they're from out of state.
Right.
I guess if we have to try to look for silver, my mother used to always tell me to look for the silver lining. They're Ohio, Tennessee, Maryland. I think there's only one actual Virginian that was arrested. And we're going after everyone who, the Charlottesville is reviewing these videos. We're helping with that.
Right.
In arresting these people who engaged in acts of violence.
All right, I want to get to Paul in Mechanicsville. You're on the air, Paul, with Secretary Moran.
Hey, thank you, John. I have a question for Secretary Moran. What leeway do you have, and I guess it would be in the government, and I know you have to worry about the amendment rights of people to speak. When people are unloading the buses and they're coming out and they're putting masks on and they've got clubs and all that kind of stuff, are there a way that either the National Guard or the state police or whatever can separate these groups? If you put a hood on, you're an Antifa, you're up to no good. You're probably supported and paid by George Soros. You don't have a job. So what leeway do you have in government to try and prevent things like that?
Right. Well, we're going to have to review what the constitutional rights are with respect to, is that free speech? The city was sued by the ACLU and saying you can't infringe on our First Amendment rights to protest. And they prevailed over the city to just all they wanted to do is move it. We weren't going to stop them. We'd just move it to a safer location, and the judge said, no, you can't do that. So we're going to have the Attorney General at the table because we got to figure this out, get some constitutional scholars. If groups, whether it be Antifa, as you have described, or Unite the Right rally-goers, if they're coming armed and dangerous, where does that breach the First Amendment right of free speech? Is that really, it's weaponized First Amendment speech? And I don't think we as a society need to recognize that if people are coming for a fight. And the other thing, Paul, is this had a little to do with Lee Monument. I got to tell you, I mean, they marched Friday night on the campus of UVA. That had nothing to do with Lee. They assembled at the rotunda at the statue of Thomas Jefferson. So I'm not sure how much Lee Monument had to do with this. Was that really First Amendment about Lee Monument? I understand people feel very strongly about that, and we've got to protect First Amendment speech. That's exactly what we're doing with this march. They wanted to march from D.C., or from Charlottesville to D.C., and we're respecting their rights, but they're doing it unarmed and not, So there's a way to do this. We got to do it constitutionally. We have to balance the constitutional rights with safety, though, and so that's what some of the things we can learn from Charlottesville. Like, what were the scales of justice? Unbalanced with respect to them showing up in buses, as you say, piling off with clearly armed.
And then also,
and I say armed, not necessarily firearms, but with clubs and
and then also wearing
the mask,
hoods.
He didn't mention masks. I mean, it is illegal. Interestingly enough, and you do some deep dive on these groups, they actually talked about, well, you can't have a mask on because that is a felony in Virginia.
Right.
And so they didn't have their faces totally covered, if you look at some of the video, because that would have been another violation. So they were familiar with Virginia law. They were familiar with our open carry laws.
So they didn't have a total mask, but they had enough of masks to cover their face.
The mask laws.
Right. Unbelievable. So they were skirting the laws.
Both sides.
Both sides.
This was organized. We were up against it was quite a scenario, quite an event.
All right, let's get to Glenn in Chesapeake. Glenn, you're on the air with Secretary Moran. Go ahead.
Thank you, John. Mr. Secretary, there's been some, the testimony of some of the Charlottesville police officers have elicited the idea that they were extremely angry that they were commanded not to separate these two groups and were allowing them to confront each other. Could you dispel this idea?
I can't speak for the Charlottesville PD. I'm not. All I can tell you, there was no stand-down order given to state police or National Guard. I'm not aware of any stand-down order that was given to anyone that day. So I was in the command center. I'm not aware of any of that. I mean, I've read those reports as well. I think that's why Charlottesville is doing their own after-action review. That's why we're doing our own as well. And some of that will come out. But sir,
has the governor asked the police chief of Charlottesville directly, was an order issued to your men to allow these two groups to confront each other and not to do anything about it? Has the governor confronted him about this? Because this is a serious issue.
Well, and Chief Thomas has denied such an order. He clearly denied that was such an order given by the Charlottesville PD chief.
Okay. Well, that answers my question. Thank you.
I don't think anyone has confirmed the existence of such an order. And so, that's why we have to, I think the public deserves, let's have an after-action review. We're not aware of any. Everyone has denied one. And so, I'm not aware of any, I'll tell you that much.
All right, I've got a text question from Den in Virginia Beach who says, my question to the secretary, looks like there were massive preparations made, but still everything went wrong. Why? One sentence will do.
Well, one, I would agree with her and disagree with her in part. Yes, preparations were made of enormous magnitude, first time in decades with the National Guard. I don't think everything went wrong. As I said, up to 1:43 p.m., when a car terrorist drove at high rate of speed down the road and hit, and horrible, struck 20, killing one young woman. Up to that point, there were no serious injuries. There were, despite the presence of those who were mutual combatants with every intention to create mayhem, there wasn't a pane of glass broken. So, I mean, we can argue. I don't want to argue about it. All right, these are the facts. I'm just going to deal with the facts. And we're going to do an after-action review to see what went right, what went wrong. Should we have put riot police around that park from the get-go? Well, they were supposed to have a peaceful rally. I think Chief Thomas was working with Jason Kessler and the rally leaders that this was expected to be, they had assured the chief that this was going to be a peaceful rally, and we were there to protect the First Amendment rights of them. I think all of that needs to be reviewed, and that's why the city is rightfully doing their own review. We're going to do our review, and see where the chips fall. I mean, we're going to do an honest review.
All right, Secretary Brian Moran of Public Safety and Homeland Security for the Commonwealth of Virginia and Terry McAuliffe's cabinet. I really want to thank you, Secretary, for your time today and, of course, answering our listeners' questions and telling us exactly what went down there in the command center. I really appreciate the time, Secretary Moran. Thank you so much. This is the John Fredericks Radio Network, Trucking the Truth across America. Let me just say again, I know this is tough to swallow for some people. A series of mistakes were made. No question. No question. And the police chief, Al Thomas, is going to have to answer to some of these. But I'm telling you, this idea that a stand-down order was given by Terry McAuliffe and Brian Moran in order to perpetuate a situation that would increase the propensity for violence for political gain is really crazy. It just didn't happen. I mean, if you want to believe it, I guess you can call Alex Jones at noon and Alex will go in with you. It didn't happen. Mistakes were made. There'll be a review. And Al Thomas has got to answer for that. But you just heard from the secretary. Al Thomas, the police chief, was in command of the operation. And that's why it's got the title of chief. Chief means you're in charge. And you can armchair quarterback this, and he's going to be held accountable for the decisions he made. But it's really tough after an hour with the secretary to really think that Terry McAuliffe had some conspiratorial theory here to put people in harm's way so that he could get caucus votes in Iowa. Frankly, it's crazy. In my judgment, you're welcome to believe what you want. I hope we got the truth out today. Thanks for joining us. This is the John Fredericks Radio Network, Trucking the Truth.